The winter morning began like any other in Havenbrook, a quiet town tucked between rolling fields and faded memories. The sun hadn't yet broken the line of rooftops when Officer Daniel Hale started his patrol. The streets were still damp from last night's drizzle, the air thin and cold enough to sting the lungs. He liked mornings like this, quiet, predictable. But that morning, nothing would stay predictable for long. At 6:47 a.m., a call crackled through his radio. Unit 4, report to Miller's Bakery. Possible theft in progress. Daniel sighed, turning the wheel. Miller's was the kind of place that smelled like butter and warmth even from the sidewalk. Theft here didn't make sense. When he pulled up, the bakery lights glowed gold against the gray dawn. Inside, behind the counter, Helen Miller, the owner, looked shaken. Flour dusted her apron, and her face was pale with disbelief. Near the door stood an old man, thin, shivering, clutching a paper bag in both hands. "That's him," Helen said, voice trembling. "He took the bread. Just walked out with it." Daniel stepped closer, his boots squeaking on the tiled floor. The old man turned, eyes hollow but calm. His coat was torn at the sleeve. His shoes were worn to the sole. "Sir," Daniel said softly, "what's your name?" The man didn't answer. He just stared at the loaf in his hands, the crust still steaming from the oven. I didn't mean." His voice cracked, dry as winter branches. "I was just hungry." Daniel had seen this before. Poverty, pride, the quiet shame that came with asking for help. But rules were rules. He glanced at Helen, who crossed her arms, anger masking pity. "He didn't even try to pay," she said. "Just walked right out." "Sir, I need you to come with me," Daniel said, reaching for the man's arm. The old man didn't resist. He nodded once, like someone who'd already accepted the world's verdict. The bell above the bakery door jingled as they stepped into the cold. Outside, Daniel opened the cruiser's door. As the man got in, the bag crinkled, releasing the smell of warm bread. A smell that suddenly felt heavy with guilt. In the rearview mirror, Daniel caught his reflection beside the man's. One young, neat, and alert. The other old, tired, and fading. The contrast unsettled him. At the station, the process was routine. Fingerprints, paperwork, property check. When Daniel emptied the man's pockets, he found a crumpled photograph, 2 coins, and something heavy, something metallic. It was a medal, tarnished but unmistakable. An old bronze service medal, its ribbon frayed from years of wear. On the back, a name faintly engraved. William Anders, for bravery, 1952. Daniel froze. His father had served around that time, Korea, he remembered. The name tugged at a memory. He looked up. "You served." The old man looked away. "A long time ago." Daniel's tone softened. "Where?" "Doesn't matter now," William said quietly. "They don't remember people like me." Something in his voice, a mixture of dignity and resignation, made Daniel's chest tighten. Helen from the bakery had followed them to file a report. She stood at the desk, arms still crossed, but her anger was dimming as she heard the exchange. I didn't know he was a veteran," she murmured. "Doesn't change the fact he stole," said Sergeant Collins, who had entered from his office. "We'll log it, write it up. Probably release him by evening. Just another petty theft." But Daniel couldn't shake the image. An old man, once decorated for bravery, now handcuffed for stealing a loaf of bread. When the paperwork was done, Daniel poured the man a cup of coffee and handed it through the bars of the holding cell. William accepted it with trembling hands. "Thank you, officer. Call me Daniel," he said. For a moment, the two sat in silence, the hum of the fluorescent lights above filling the space between them. "Where do you stay?" Daniel asked finally. "Nowhere in particular." William's gaze drifted to the window. Snow had begun to fall. Used to have a home, used to have a family. But that was a long time ago. Something inside Daniel shifted, guilt, maybe, or shame for having followed procedure without question. He glanced again at the medal lying on the desk. He'd grown up believing men like William were heroes. His father used to say, "Some people keep their medals in drawers, others carry them in their hearts." And yet here sat one of them, cold, hungry, forgotten. Later that evening, Daniel stopped by the bakery again. Helen was closing up, lights dimmed, broom in hand. "How's the old man?" she asked quietly. "He'll be released tomorrow. Probably just needs a place to stay." She hesitated, then set down the broom. "You think I was too harsh?" Daniel didn't answer. He just looked at the glass display case, where rows of untouched bread loaves gleamed under the faint light. "Maybe we all were," he finally said. That night he couldn't sleep. The image of William in the cell kept replaying. His calm face, the faint tremor in his hands, the old metal glinting under the fluorescent light. Daniel got out of bed before dawn and drove back to the station. When he arrived, William was gone, released as scheduled. The cell was empty except for the folded blanket and the paper cup he'd left behind. On the desk, Daniel noticed something else, an envelope. His name written on the front in shaky cursive. He opened it. Inside was the photograph William had carried. It showed a young soldier, smiling beside his unit, a mountain in the background. On the back, faded ink read, "For Daniel Hale, because you still looked a man in the eye." Daniel sat there for a long time, staring at the photo. The world outside was waking up again. The same bakery, the same streets, but something in him had changed. He slipped the medal into his pocket and whispered, "I'll find you, William." He didn't yet know what that would mean, or where it would lead. But deep down, he understood this was no ordinary theft. Something about that man's silence, his shame, his eyes that had seen more than they ever should, told Daniel that William's story was not over. And as the first sunlight hit the frosted window of the police station, Daniel Hale, officer of Havenbrook, made a quiet vow to uncover who William Anders really was and what the world had done to forget him. The next morning in Havenbrook was bitter cold. The streets were slick with half-frozen puddles, and the trees looked like skeletons dressed in ice. Officer Daniel Hale sat in his car outside the station, the heater hissing softly, William's bronze medal resting on the passenger seat. He hadn't told anyone he still had it. Something about giving it back felt wrong, like returning a story to silence before it was told. He'd spent most of the night searching through old service databases, Korean War, early 1950s, but nothing matched the name William Anders. The medal's engraving was faint but real. Someone somewhere had once pinned it to his chest with pride. By the time Daniel walked into the station, the day shift had started. Sergeant Collins barely looked up from his paperwork. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he muttered. "Maybe I have," Daniel replied quietly. Collins sighed. "If this is about that old man, drop it. He's just another vagrant. Not your problem." But Daniel couldn't. Not after that note, not after that photograph. He went back to Miller's Bakery around noon. Helen looked up as the bell jingled, wiping flour from her hands. "He came by this morning," she said before Daniel could ask. "William." She nodded. He didn't say anything, just stood outside for a while, looking in through the window. "I brought out a loaf and gave it to him." He took it, smiled a little, and walked off toward the bus stop. Daniel thanked her and left, following the trail through slush and salt. At the bus shelter, he found only a discarded ticket stub and a footprint leading toward the old industrial district, the part of town that hadn't recovered since the factory closures 20 years ago. He parked near a crumbling brick warehouse, its windows shattered, graffiti marking its walls. It smelled of rust and wet concrete. Inside, through a broken doorway, he saw a makeshift camp. A few cardboard boxes, a blanket, a tin cup, and a small pile of books. On top of the books was a photograph frame, empty. And beside it, another metal ribbon, torn and faded. Daniel picked it up, his pulse quickening. "Looking for someone, officer?" The voice came from behind him, soft, weary. William stood in the doorway, coat buttoned wrong, eyes sunken but alert. "I told you it doesn't matter," he said. "It matters to me," Daniel replied. William smiled faintly. "You're too young to understand. Once you've seen what I've seen, You stop expecting people to remember. Then help me remember for you. William hesitated, looking past Daniel at the gray light filtering through the warehouse roof. Then, slowly, he walked forward and sat down on the crate that served as his chair. I was 23 when I went overseas, he began. Korea. Winter of '52. I didn't volunteer. But once you're there, you learn that it's not about politics. It's about the man beside you. Keeping him alive. He paused, staring at the dust swirling in the air. There was a village in the hills. Coldest place I've ever been. We got caught in an ambush. Most of us didn't make it out. I dragged my sergeant out under fire. That's what the medal's for. Daniel listened, transfixed. When I came back, there was no parade. No one waiting. My wife had moved on, my job was gone. The company that built the factory over there, Havenbrook Steel, had cut half its workers. I did odd jobs. Janitor, night guard, whatever kept me breathing. Then the factory closed, too. After that, nothing. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the crumpled photograph Daniel had returned the day before. That's my unit, he said softly. Most of them buried under names no one remembers. Why didn't you ask for help? Daniel asked. William's laugh was quiet, bitter. Help? People like to thank veterans, officer. They don't like to see them. The words hit Daniel hard. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the distant hum of traffic and the whisper of snow against the roof filled the silence. Then William added, almost to himself, You want to know the worst part? I used to walk past that bakery every morning years ago. Used to buy bread for my daughter before school. Haven't seen her since '85. She was 6. Daniel looked up sharply. You have a daughter? William nodded slowly. Her name's Claire. She moved away when her mother remarried. I didn't have much to offer back then. Tried to reach her once. Never got a reply. Daniel wrote down the name. Do you know where she might be? No idea, William said, his voice thinning. If she's smart, she forgot about me. But Daniel wasn't ready to leave it there. That night, after clocking out, he drove home and opened his laptop. The town records were old and incomplete, but through the state registry, he found something. Claire Anders, married name. Claire Matheson. Address, Riverside Heights, just 3 hours away. Daniel stared at the screen, then at the medal lying beside it. The next day, on his day off, he drove to Riverside Heights. A clean, quiet suburb with trimmed hedges and white fences. He found the house easily. A blue door, wind chimes by the porch, the smell of coffee drifting from somewhere inside. When the door opened, a woman in her 40s stood there. Tired eyes, kind smile. Can I help you? She asked. Mrs. Matheson? Yes. My name's Officer Daniel Hale, from Havenbrook Police. I'm looking for information about your father, William Anders. Her expression froze. For a second, she didn't move. I think there's been a mistake, she said finally. My father died a long time ago. Daniel hesitated. I don't think he did. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph. Her hand trembled as she took it. I haven't seen this in decades, she whispered. Where did you get it? He gave it to me yesterday, Daniel said. Claire stepped back, eyes wide, tears filling her voice. That's impossible. But Daniel could tell she wanted to believe it wasn't. Where is he? She asked quietly. Still in Havenbrook, Daniel replied. Living out by the old factory. For a moment, she stood motionless in the doorway. Then she wiped her eyes and whispered. My father used to take me to that factory. Said it was where the town began. Said the machines sounded like music. Daniel nodded. He still remembers that. She smiled sadly. Then maybe it's time I did too. When he left Riverside Heights, snow had begun to fall again. It blanketed the windshield, soft and relentless, as if the world itself wanted to erase the distance between two lives that had drifted apart. Back in Havenbrook, Daniel stopped by the warehouse to tell William what he'd found. But the place was empty. The blanket was gone. The books, the cup, even the frame, all gone. Only a single folded note remained on the crate. Thank you for looking, Officer Hale. Some things are better found quietly. No signature. Daniel felt the chill cut through him. He looked down at the ground. A faint trail of footprints led toward the river, the kind that disappear when snow begins to fall. The snow had stopped by dawn, leaving Havenbrook cloaked in white silence. The streets glistened under a pale sun, the kind of morning that makes even broken places look peaceful. But for Officer Daniel Hale, peace was the last thing he felt. He parked by the riverbank where the footprints had ended the night before. The current moved slow and dark beneath a thin layer of ice, the kind that looked solid until you stepped too close. There was no sign of William Anders, no blanket, no camp, no body. Just the river whispering secrets to the wind. Daniel refused to believe it ended here. Back at the station, he spent the day combing through reports, calling shelters, hospitals, even neighboring precincts. Nothing. It was as if William had vanished again. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that William hadn't simply disappeared. He had chosen to. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Daniel returned to the old factory one last time. Inside, dust hung like fog in the fading light. He was about to leave when something caught his eye, a loose floorboard beneath the crate where William used to sit. He knelt and pried it open. Inside was a small tin box, rusted, dented, but carefully sealed. Daniel's pulse quickened as he opened it. Inside were a few folded papers, a faded photograph of a little girl, Claire, and something else, another medal. This one gold, not bronze, and engraved with the same name. William Anders, for bravery beyond duty. 1952. Daniel frowned. 2 medals? The official record had listed only 1 award per recipient. He examined the papers, old military correspondence, yellowed with age. And then, near the bottom, a typed letter bearing a government seal. Notice of withheld commendation confidential. Due to operational errors and classified mission outcomes, recognition of service for Private William Anders is hereby suspended until further notice. Daniel stared at the letter, realization dawning. William hadn't just been a soldier. He had been part of an operation the government buried. His heroism had been erased, his name quietly struck from records. The next morning, Daniel called Claire Matheson. "Mrs. Matheson," he said, voice tight with emotion, "I think you should see something." 3 hours later, she arrived in Havenbrook. The drive had drained her, but her eyes burned with a quiet determination. Daniel led her to the factory, now glistening under melting snow. He handed her the tin box. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling as she touched the gold medal. "I thought he made these stories up," she whispered. "Mom said he was just lost." "He wasn't," Daniel said softly. "He saved lives. He just couldn't save himself from being forgotten." Claire brushed a tear from her cheek. "He used to talk about this place all the time, the factory, the people. Said it was where the town began. He always said the men who worked here built more than steel. They built each other." Daniel smiled faintly. "There's one more thing." He pulled out a folded page he had found tucked beneath the tin box, a receipt of donation from 1987, signed by William Anders. It showed that he had donated the last of his savings, $2,000, to the Havenbrook Community Fund, earmarked for the construction of a small-town clinic. Claire gasped. "The Havenbrook Medical Center." Daniel nodded. "The same one that opened in 1990. He helped fund it." They drove there together, the wind whistling softly through the car vents. The clinic sat on the edge of town, modest but well-kept, its front lawn covered in melting snow. Inside, the receptionist greeted them warmly. Daniel asked if they could check the donation records. A few minutes later, the woman returned, holding a leather-bound ledger. "Yes," she said, flipping the pages. "Here, 1987. William Anders, anonymous benefactor. He never claimed recognition." Claire's eyes filled again. "He gave everything he had to help people, and no one ever knew." Daniel nodded, then looked toward the small memorial plaque near the entrance. It listed names of the town's early donors and volunteers. William's name wasn't there. Not yet. That night, Daniel wrote a letter to the town council, enclosing copies of the documents, photographs, and medals. He didn't use official police stationery, just a plain envelope and his signature at the bottom. Some debts, he wrote, aren't paid with punishment or paperwork. They're paid with remembrance. 2 weeks later, a quiet ceremony was held at the Havenbrook Medical Center. Snow fell softly as townspeople gathered by the plaque. Helen Miller was there, holding a loaf of bread wrapped in paper. Sergeant Collins stood beside her, hands clasped. When Claire stepped forward to unveil the new bronze plate, her voice trembled with pride. In memory of William Anders, soldier, father, and friend of Havenbrook, a man who gave more than he ever took. The crowd was silent for a long moment. Then Helen placed the loaf of bread at the base of the plaque. For the one who was hungry, she whispered, and made sure others wouldn't be. Daniel stood apart, watching the snow drift down. In his pocket, he still carried the original bronze medal, the first one he had found. He rubbed it gently with his thumb, feeling the worn edges. "Rest easy, William," he murmured. "You're not forgotten anymore." As the crowd dispersed, Claire approached him. "You found him," she said softly. Daniel looked at the plaque. "No," he replied. "He found us." The last light of evening caught on the metal inscription, glinting gold against the snow, like a metal rediscovered, shining after years of silence. And somewhere, in the quiet between wind and memory, it felt as though Havenbrook itself exhaled, finally remembering one of its own.